Good morning or good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for another best practice webinar with Accelo. Today we're going to be looking at business workflow design. So my name is Adam. I work in the implementation department here at Accelo, and I'll be the host of today's webinar. And then we've got John as well, who works in our sales and is a service designer, and he'll be presenting to the content today. So a bit of an overview of today's session. We're really going to go into the workflow design, starting a bit broadly with some examples from industry, and then looking at a bit of how you design a workflow. Then we're going to kind of dive into two of the modules we have here in Accelo, in the ticketing and projects, to show you what the different components are and what we've seen as best practice. And then finally, a bit of improvement in the innovation space on how you can really optimize your workflows. Now, please feel free to submit your questions as we go along. There's a Q&A section of the webinar, or you can send them through in the chat function and we'll get to them at the end. I'm going to hand over to John now so we can get into the content.
Great, thanks, Adam. So what I first wanted to do was kick off with a service business example outside of the professional service industry to start it off. And what I wanted to start off with was Starbucks. And the reason I want to do Starbucks is hopefully most of the people on the call today have been in a Starbucks or at least heard about what Starbucks does. And also what I like about it is how consistent the product and the service is. They've really found a solid niche of being able to, from all the way from China to the UK, have a really simple process that delivers the same latte and the same cappuccino wherever you are, and also the same service. When you walk into a Starbucks, you feel warm and welcomed by the employees and the environment that they've built. And then lastly, it was my first job, so I've been on both sides as the employee of a Starbucks and also as someone who frequents Starbucks. When you go to a Starbucks, you're first greeted by the line or the queue. And what you'll start seeing is things like the menu, what's available, some of the merchandising here for upselling. And then the next phase or the process when you go into a Starbucks is you're greeted by the barista at the point of sale. And let's say Sean here asks you what you would like, and you order off the menu. You might order a pastry, and he takes down your order and you pay him. And then what Sean does is he passes it off to Jimmy, and Jimmy makes the latte. Let's say it's double strength this morning, and you're watching as Jimmy makes it, getting really excited for your drink. And then either Jimmy, or if he's too busy, he passes it off to Lauren, and she greets you with a smile, calls your name, says, "Hey John, your double strength latte is up and ready." And you say, "Thanks, Lauren." And you take the latte, and then the next step is you either sit there for a few minutes and enjoy it, or as this gentleman does, a few days on your computer as you work remotely, or however you end up spending your time in Starbucks. And the reason I wanted to go through this example is to share some frameworks that Starbucks uses and that we use with our customers when they're designing their products and services. And those two are business process modeling and service blueprint. Adam, if you wanted to talk a bit to this as well.
Yeah, so especially when we have new clients come in and we're discussing workflows initially, we talk about there's a couple of ways that we normally see it going. Our first one is the really simplistic way of setting up your different phases of your, say, project or sale to mirror what you want to see in a reporting sense. So, on your list screens, if you want to look at your project pipeline and see where everything is, you'll kind of structure the different phases or statuses, we call them in Accelo, as different areas you want to see from a reporting standpoint. Alternatively, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail soon, is you can actually optimize your statuses so that you can maximize the amount of automation you can bring in. And something we'll be talking about soon is progression actions. And you can really tailor your statuses in a certain way that you can get the majority of the work that happens in a project or a sales process to be automated or standardized using progression actions. So we normally see them going one or two ways from the start.
Thanks, Adam. And when you're building or making a business process model or even a service blueprint, it doesn't have to be fancy, Sometimes we use things like Lucidchart or Draw.io, but as you can see here, it really only takes a pen and paper to start mapping out the journey of the client and the interactions that you have with them. So what we're seeing here is the Starbucks example. Is first start off with, I'm thirsty, I need to have some Starbucks, or at least I've identified Starbucks as the right store to go to. And then we go to the moving into the line phase, or status, you can think of it that way. I then decide on a product from the menu or the type of work that I want Starbucks to go down. And then there's the ordering phase, and there's a bunch of other actions that happen within all of these phases, but essentially there's the make of the drink, the call out of the drink, and then the enjoy. And you can think of these as the flow or the business process that Starbucks takes to eventually deliver that service and product to the customer. The other approach is called a service blueprint. What it does is it first starts with the physical evidence that the customer sees within the store, like the storefront or the barista at the point of sale. And then there's the customer actions that they take as they move through the service and the product, like paying or picking up the drink. There's the front stage where the employee is interacting with the client, and then there's the backstage where the employee is doing all the work and rendering all the work. So often the backstage is hidden behind the line of visibility, like they're pulling the shots or they're setting up the menu and the pastries before the store opens. And then lastly, there's the support process. Normally this is like the workflows, the process, the business technology that underpins the whole entire operation. What we've found is the business process model works really well for understanding the flow, whereas the service blueprint is a really good way to understand the customer or the client journey. And if you're a web design company or if you're a business consultancy, you might be having these conversations already with the customer around design thinking or innovation around how they can better service the client. Now, if we are to take this now in your terms of operation and Accelo, what it can do, let's take a look at the customer issue ticket for the business processing model. It normally starts off with a customer has an issue that they can't solve on their own. And then possibly there's a few channels that they go through. They might send an email to support, call the hotline, or as we probably ask them not to, but they still do, they email their favorite technician. And then there's a flow of taking these emails or phone calls or whatever channels they choose, and the support technician creates the ticket. So you can think of this as when a customer arrives at Starbucks, they've identified a need, and then the different queuing that happens when it comes into our world. Then sometimes there's decision points like, do I have enough information? And then there's eventually a resolution or working on the problem and then notifying the customer that I'm done. So normally business process models, and again, this is a very slimmed down version of what it can be. You can think of this as just boxes of things that happen, whether they're client or internal, and then arrows that connect the things that need to happen. On the other side, if we were to do a website project example using the service blueprint, physical evidence is really difficult for especially online or digital consultancy or web design businesses. So what we've seen the best practice out there is using the phases or the general evidence of the project and just calling them there. Whereas the evidence is really the sign-offs, the invoices, the reviews and things that happen as you go into these different phases. So for example, if I'm kicking off a project, maybe the customer needs to grab the KPIs. If I'm building a mobile app, we're trying to increase revenue by 10%. What are the goals of the project? And then I have my conversation with the client, like a kickoff call. On the backstage actions, this would be internally within the web design firm. What do I need to do, like an internal kickoff call? And then lastly, there's the support processes. Usually we're thinking of these as the technologies that underpin this operation, like I've created a creative brief in Google Drive, or I've just kicked off my Accelo project. And we're going to be using these two examples to go through all of the ways that we have statuses, progressions, and actions within Accelo, and how you can build a process within Accelo that maps onto something that you've created, a pen and paper, or like I said, with the software. So what I wanted to do was start off on the ticket side. We'll first jump into statuses and then go to more advanced things like progressions and eventually actions. How can I automate my process? So we'll go back to this customer issue and ticket example. And the first choice or decision that we need to make is, based on this workflow, what should we call the different phases of the statuses? And these are the four most common ones that we're finding with our customers. When a new ticket comes into our world, we usually want to have a submitted status. It's been submitted by the customer, but we aren't actively working on it. Then we have a decision point. It's open, or we need more information and we move it into waiting. And then lastly, we want to resolve the ticket. So what I'm going to show you is how to set up these four different statuses on a ticket, and then we'll take it from there. So all of the progressions and types and actions will be through configuration. And in this case, we are interested in tickets. And anytime we're talking about workflows and custom business processes, that would be under progressions and fields here. So we already have one ticket type. Let's create a new one. You might want to put notes for the admin coming back to, maybe assumptions that you've made, maybe even a link to the business process map. Then some of these other fields for custom ID, this just allows you to have a number in front of the different tickets that are opened. Is it billable? Is the work here billable? Can I eventually invoice the customer, or will it pull up onto a contract? Or is this something that's just internal, like I have an issue with my computer and the internal tech team is working on it? Email sender address. This most often than not will use the user's own email address, meaning that the technician emailing the client can see who the technician is and knows him by name. Or we can use a variety of different aliases if we want to hide the technician, especially if we're like outsourcing the work, or if we don't want them individually emailing them. This has been a really good way to mask that. And then lastly, if we're building a new ticket progression, maybe we want to pull the progressions from a previous ticket and just make some slight modifications to it. This will save you a lot of time by pulling the progressions as well as the custom fields. But in the example today, we're going to build it from scratch. So if we remember, we wanted 4 different statuses, and the way that we create new statuses is here. First one being submitted. What standing does is, in the example today, it's going to nearly perfectly map onto the name that we give the statuses. But let's say that you have 4 different ticket types, and on a different ticket type, submitted is a different name. What we'll do is make the standing submitted, but then the title would be some other thing like on-site visit requested. What standing does is, as Adam was alluding to on reporting, if you're trying to report against multiple different types, standing helps you roll up all the names within a given type. It makes it a lot easier to say, what is everything within this status that is submitted, even if they're different names. And then the last one is start. This allows you to define if a status can start a progression. In this case, yes. In a lot of cases, no, we don't want a status to start a progression. It's in the middle of a workflow. And then waiting if we don't have enough information. So submitted, waiting, open, and then the last one would be resolved. So now what we have is, besides our little blank status here, we have the four statuses that are involved in the process that we defined. The next step in defining my business process workflow is connecting the dots, I like to think of that as. And the dots, or the lines in between each of these phases, are what we call progressions. So for example, when a new ticket comes in, the progression would be moving it to submitted. Or when a support technician or someone on our team starts working on a ticket, we will then progress it or move it between submitted and opened. So the next step in building this workflow would be creating status progressions. And just like the business process map, what we do is we connect it by dragging two statuses together, unless if it's the on create. And then lastly, we have open to resolved. So we have available on create to submitted, submitted to open, and then open to resolved. And then we have this side area as well. And what we'll do is we'll address this a bit later in the call, something called loops or decision points, and show you how you can build those into the process. And then the last thing we can do is build actions. And actions are things that you want to happen in each step. You can think of this as not only automating the updates and things that need to happen to the ticket in this case, but they can also be automation sitting behind in Accelo to help you update fields or to send out automated alerts. In this case, what we want to happen is an automation at the very end when we resolve the ticket to then notify the customer that we've resolved it. What I'll do is add an action, and like I was mentioning before, there's a full range of actions that can happen, like updating a field, uploading a file, like a creative brief, as we'll see on the project side, or creating an activity. And activities in Accelo are either internal notes, emails, they can even be meetings that we send out to the customer. Creating a task, this is, at least on the ticket side, good for follow-ups. Maybe we haven't heard from the customer in a week or so. And then a full range of special processes that we'll get into a bit later in the call. So what I want to do is, there's actually two things. On the resolve, I want to say, turn your computer off, wait 5 minutes, and turn it back on. So that's a resolution note. And then on top of that, I want to send that resolution note to the customer. So first, I want to update the resolution type. I'm going to leave it blank in this example. Do I want it required? Probably, because we're emailing this to the customer, but sometimes I don't want required fields. Like this is an FYI or helpful piece of information in the sales process, but not really necessary for the closing of the sale. That's the times when I might not want it to be required. And then lastly, hidden. In this case, we don't want this hidden because we do want the technician to update and put in the resolution type to then send to the customer. In other cases, we do want it hidden, like an automatic alert if a ticket has just moved into a certain status for our team. So update the resolution type, and that's mainly for internal reporting. And then next, I want to update the resolution. Put in some helpful information, maybe some guidance for the technician on what they should put in here. And then the last thing that I want to do after I update those fields is create an activity, or you can think of that as an email to the customer. So in this case, I want to email the main ticket contact. And in the off chance that the person who submitted the ticket is different from the main contact on the ticket, I want to email them both. In action title, usually I like to put what I'm doing, like an email. If it's an internal note, I might do internal alert here. And then the title of the email. And what we found best practice for internal emails and then also for clients to be able to easily search it later is either have the subject here so that it's a unique email in their inbox or some sort of ID. And that really depends on how your team works. If it's more casual and personal, a subject might be helpful. If it's more operational and there's a lot of tickets going around, maybe an ID would work better, or maybe both. And what I'm pulling in here, these merge fields, is taking information from the issue and then automatically populating it. And we'll see what that looks like as we go through the ticket. Maybe we want a little PS at the very end with a link to the client portal. We can start making it personal. And then lastly, I want to pull in some other fields like my resolution notes. And a nice little sign off from the technician who was working on it. And again, this idea of hidden and required comes up on this. We don't want this hidden because my team wants to potentially personalize this email as we send it out. Maybe there's an existing relationship and this email template feels a little too operational, so I'm not going to have it hidden. And on the required side, yeah, I really don't want any of my technicians skipping when I close out a ticket. And then the last part of this is just helpful for billable work. Let's say that these emails used to take you 10 minutes, but now you've automated it in Accelo. You can put that 10 minutes in if you still want to charge for that time and have it billable. So let's take a look at what this looks like. And again, this might be coming through the various channels as well, instead of me just manually creating a ticket. So we've now submitted it. And the only option that we have from submitted is to open. And that's because the only progression that we're allowing it to move into open is from submitted here. And then the next step as we're opening and working on the ticket is to move it into resolved. And as you can see here, when it's opened, it can only move into resolved. I know this isn't the perfect example because it can probably go into a few different areas, but just for today, we'll make it linear. And then I want to update the resolution type, the resolution, and then send a quick email to the customer letting them know that we resolved it. So I gave some advice. In the case of this, I asked them to turn it off. And now what it's done is it's pulled it in this activity, sent it to the ticket submitter, with the title of the ID and what we've done, as well as the notes of what we found. And then lastly, the 10 minutes are already sitting there. And now we've moved it to a resolved ticket. So in some ways, it's starting to now resemble this ideal workflow that we're building out for the client and sort of ideal for our process internally, moving from a submitted to an open, resolving, and then automatically notifying the customer. Now on the project side, we'll go through the same workflow of statuses, progressions, and actions. So the first is taking a look at statuses on projects. And what we found is two approaches. Projects are interesting because a project process in Accelo is both statuses that are high level, as well as the actual process of the project with the milestones and tasks that go into it. So sometimes we're seeing our customers mirror the project plan of the planning, the design, all the way to the complete. And then in other cases, we've seen our customers simplifying it, where they have a planning stage for everything that's coming through the pipeline, then taking all these statuses and making them live. That's just helpful to say, well, 50% of my projects are currently in the live status, 50% are in the planning, rather than being possibly too granular in each of these statuses. And then lastly, a complete or a go live status. So similar to basically every choice that we had for creating a ticket, exact same setup for statuses and progressions. So we have a planning stage. We have an active or a live status. And then lastly, we have a complete status. Similar to the ticket side, especially if we were to do a linear approach, is just connect the progressions between each of the statuses. So anytime we create a new project, we want it to move to planning. Planning moves to active. Active and live projects move to complete. And then the actions that can kick off a project in this case. So anytime we want to move it to the planning, we can like a ticket, update a field, upload a file, notify team members, and then do a special process. So in this case, we were saying, well, we need to pull that team together or notify them what's going on. We need to upload the creative brief and then possibly send a down deposit invoice. Then let's notify the project managers and the company managers that a project just started, or is at least in the planning phase. And I'll just give them an internal link to see where it's coming from. So that would be the behind the scenes that the customer doesn't see. And then lastly, a special process. So on the planning, what we found helpful is having a plan, kick off every single new project, as well as if it's a fixed bid project and there is a down deposit that's needed, then to send an invoice. So let's see this in action. So we first want to upload that creative brief. In this case, I'm going to link directly to Google Drive. Maybe I'll upload this best practice webinar. Next, it brings me to the project planning notification to James Knoll, who's the project manager and the client manager here. So I'll save that internal note to notify the team. And then lastly, it brings me automatically to send a down deposit invoice. And we're using invoice templates here. There's another best practice webinar on that for how we can automate the ability to have down deposit invoices automatically say 25% here. And then, like I was mentioning, we would probably drop in the project plan as well to sit there. So that's everything for the simple connecting statuses, progressions, and actions on the ticket and the project side. Now what I want to do is jump into 3 more advanced things. The first one being decision points and loops. So in our more advanced ticket workflow, a support technician creates the ticket, and then there's a question internally of, do we have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to solve this? And if that personal technician doesn't, then we ask the question, who does? Does the client? Does a third-party vendor like Oracle or Salesforce? Is it an internal team member and someone more knowledgeable than me? And do I need to escalate it to a tier 2 support person? So let's hop back to these tickets. And what I want is before it moves to open, or actually even in open, we'll move it to a waiting status. So we have that waiting status here. And something that we can do in more complicated loops would be to have waiting come from a specific area. Sometimes we're seeing a waiting as just a catch-all status, and you can move any into waiting and then drop waiting back down into an open queue. It's however you want to set it up. Today we'll do open to waiting and then back to open, but just to let you know, you can do more advanced things. And then what we want to have is specifically who's involved with this waiting, or who do we want to work on it. And there's a few things that we can do. One that we found actually really helpful is creating a custom field. Called waiting reason. Potentially we want to drop down of all the different waiting reasons. Other times we want it just more open, like a text field. And now that it's in waiting, what we need to do is we need to loop it back into a status in that core workflow. So we're going to loop it back into open. So that will address the waiting on the client or waiting on a third party. And then internally, we might want to do an escalation queue, like a tier 2 support, or potentially just a reassignment workflow. We don't have time to go into that today, but that's likely what we would do as the next step there. Next is a point of automation. So if you can see here at the very bottom, normally we go through the ticket workflow, at least as it is currently today before Accelo, and we ask our question at the very end, is it covered by a support contract? And then we eventually log our time. What we can do in Accelo is change the flow of that. So anytime we open and create a new ticket, we can have it automatically go to the support contract. And as we progressively log time on the ticket, it can automatically link back to that support contract. So here, anytime we open a ticket, we'll go into a special process. And what we want to do is link to the latest active or open contract. And now what this will do anytime we've moved it to open is it's automatically going to link back into that contract. And then the last piece of it is service and product offerings. So when this comes into the queue, we may have a triage team who looks at the needs of the ticket and determines, is this ticket a bug? Or does it feel more like an improvement that we can backlog? Or is this something where we need to go over to the client site and help them out? So what we'll do in that case is we'll create different ticket types and then select them when we're opening a new ticket. So here we might want to have a bug ticket type. And then in this case, we can take all of the nice examples we're bringing from example ticket and use that as the baseline for this new ticket. And then from here, this is a totally new ticket. We can say, well, maybe there's a few other steps that need to go into bug tracking, and we can add that here. So some other examples of service and product offerings on the sales, you might have a different type for new business versus upsell. For projects, website might be different than social media. And we already went in this example on a retainer, it might be prepaid versus a postpaid retainer. And you can have as many types as you want, it's just not binary like this. So when we're designing workflows and we're thinking about the process, there's a lot of considerations that go into that. We fortunately don't have time to jump into every single one, but we did want to talk about two things. First, the cycle time and how long between different stages and overall how long the process is taking. And then transparency when we're going through the process with the customer, and then also internal transparency. So one of the examples was going back to the Starbucks was cycle time. When people were coming into the store, they're finding that the most of the time was actually waiting in line for ordering the drink and getting the drink. And that was a big problem in their process as they're looking at it. So what they developed was a order ahead app, and a lot of other stores like Starbucks have done this as well, where you can order ahead, you can skip the queue or skip the line, that one of the bigger pain points in the service and the product, and then just go and enjoy your drink or get it to go. So if we're applying that same cycle time to the tickets, a lot of the times this waiting status is a big issue of, is the client getting back to us? Is the third party vendor getting back to us? And some of the things that we can do with cycle time is put in custom fields and measure the days or the time in between when it moves into a status. So what I'll do is have a timestamp field called date waiting. Then anytime I move it into waiting, I'm going to update this field. And this is all for reporting and for measuring the cycle time so I can have continuous process improvement. In that case, someone on our team doesn't need to see this. It's just a hidden metric that's sitting behind. And then the last is I want to have the default value being today, the day that it moves into waiting. And what you'll be able to do from this is see the day that it's moved into waiting. And then the last thing that we probably need to do is have the days in status. And so I'm going to create a formula. Today minus the day that it moved into that status. And so now what we'll be able to pull reports on is the number of days that it's in the waiting status in this case. And then we can look at, is it 10 days in the waiting status? Is it 4 days? And with our custom fields here, waiting reason, and we should probably have it as a dropdown, we can start seeing, is it the client that's usually waiting longer, or is it third party? What third party are we actively or more often waiting than not? And these are the sort of things that's going to help innovate, sort of like how Starbucks did, finding the wait time and thinking about solutions to deal with it. Then the other side of it was around process transparency. And in the case of a website delivery project, a lot of the process transparency was around the backstage actions and showing them, really similar to the Starbucks example. They're having a lot of issues, and they wanted to show that they had craft and that they're making the drinks, that they weren't hiding anything. So what they did was they dropped down all their espresso and their coffee machines in the front to make the client interaction more face-to-face. They can actually see the process and what was going on before they got their drink. And they're finding that people actually enjoy the drinks more when they saw all the work that went into that. So similar on the website side, a lot of that transparency around, is it on time? Is it on budget? What sort of design are you currently working on? And this is often a big pain point behind the line of visibility on much larger projects. Am I actively delivering value to the customer, and can they see that? So what we have here is a few things. So within this project, what we can do is anytime we kick off a live project, we can have a sign off to make sure that they agree and can make comments on the design brief that we've put together. And let's take a look at that example project. And let's make sure that they have access to the portal. So now we move the status into active. In that case, it's James as well. Or we can drag the files here. I would like her to sign off, and we can even put a due date on this for her to get back to us. And it might be a different project, unfortunately. So it's not James logged in, but normally what we'll be able to do is see the sign-offs that we then built into the process here, and they can approve or decline them from the client portal.